You may have heard the term pigeon's blood when used to describe rubies, and today I'm going to break down exactly what that means. So pigeon's blood ruby is definitely an old-fashioned expression, but I recently heard it again in an old rerun of Billions, where the character Wags is basically using it to describe what he thinks is the ideal kind of sophisticated and elegant engagement ring versus an ice rink-sized diamond. So I thought I would break it down because it is more common than I would think. So rubies are actually corundum, which essentially makes them the same as sapphires. So for all intents and purposes, they are a red sapphire. And in their best qualities, they do command the highest dollar per carat of any gem, including diamonds. This is because finding rubies in sizes even over 1 carat in a very fine color grade is extremely rare. And when I say fine color grade, I'm looking to see a medium to medium dark tone with vivid saturation and pretty much no brownish tint in that ruby. So this is where the term pigeon's blood ruby comes in, because as I'm sure you can imagine, it's being used as a metaphor for a very deep red, even slightly purplish red, very saturated color. Of course, just like many of these types of expressions, this term is in no means official, and instead it's just being used as a rule of thumb to communicate to others that, whoever is maybe selling or has this ruby thinks it's of ideal color. Of course, the problem with this is that what you might think is an ideal color for a ruby is very much likely different than what someone else might think. And so when we're looking at value, yes, we're kind of in that medium to medium dark tone and very vivid red color, but some people prefer more of a hot pink ruby, which others would consider more of a pink sapphire and not a ruby at all. The color of ruby can very much have a range between orangish red, a true red, and then of course your purplish red. For me personally, for example, I do love more of a raspberry red ruby, so that is that kind of slightly purplish red. Others want that bright fire engine red, which might veer more towards orange. The other thing to know about this term pigeon's blood ruby is that it's most often used to refer to Burmese rubies, which of course now come from the area now known as Myanmar. And Myanmar rubies are by far the most historical, probably the most famous rubies of all, and that's because they do have that historical context. They're known for being extremely scarce to source, and as a rule of thumb, they are generally of the highest quality. But again, with any gems, we kind of have to take all of this knowledge with, a grain of salt, because it's not necessarily always true. One of the biggest reasons why Myanmar rubies became so famous is because they form in marble in what is called a metamorphic environment. And essentially this allows these rubies to have very high quantities of chromium, which is the rare trace element that makes a ruby red. And it's also the element that causes fluorescence in rubies, which is one of their most famous trademarks. Keep in mind that other metamorphic rubies can also be found in areas of Vietnam and in Afghanistan. Now, as an example, in contrast to the metamorphic rubies, we also find rubies very much in Africa, in places like Madagascar and Mozambique, and they're also famously found in Thailand. Now, with these areas, they are known for having basalt rock, and basalt rock is generally higher in iron. The thing with trace iron in a ruby is that it tends to have a less saturated color because it's giving that ruby a little bit more of a brown tint, which again makes it a little bit darker, have a little bit less light reflection. And the other famous thing with having a high amount of iron is that the iron prohibits the fluorescence from happening in a ruby. And this is one of the main reasons why a ruby having fluorescence is very much associated with a high quality ruby, very much found in metamorphic environments like Myanmar. Lastly, because pigeon blood ruby again is associated with the highest quality of ruby, even though again we know that that may not necessarily be true, they're also associated with generally being considered untreated. So again, just like 90% of sapphires on the market, rubies are very much heat treated in general to improve their clarity and their color. But when we say pigeon's blood ruby or Burmese ruby, we're thinking of the highest quality ruby, which in the trade we're going to assume is untreated. But again, it's never safe to assume anything when it comes to gems, and if you are in the market for a ruby, it's very much okay to have a treated, heated ruby. Of course, the most important thing is that it has a color and a light reflection and beautiful saturation that is good to your eye and that you think looks beautiful. But again, if you're looking for that very high quality, maybe Myanmar metamorphic a beautiful, vivid, saturated ruby and you are willing to pay top dollar, you're gonna want to clarify whether it has been heat treated or not so that you can make that decision for yourself and not go into the purchase with any assumptions. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to learn more about treatments, be sure to watch our videos on those specifically. And of course, you can learn more about gems and jewelry on our main page at winstongemsandjewelry.com.